They dragged you into the street just past noon, the sun high, pitiless. Dresses rustled, boots scraped, children hushed as your name was barked, sharp, unfamiliar. Not the name your mother gave you, nor the one whispered by your husband when the nights were kind. This name, this one tasted of rust and public shame, thief. A man with a red beard held up a ledger, worn, heavy, creased at the spine. He jabbed his finger against the page. "Her mark is here," he said. "Bottom of the 5th column." You shook your head. But in a place like this, no one needed truth, only ink and firewood. They didn't jail you, didn't shoot. Just tore the sleeve of your dress, right where the sheriff branded you with his seal, hot metal against skin, hissing, like judgment. The crowd dispersed slowly, like smoke after a storm. You stood alone, hand on your belly. 3 months along, no gold, no ring, no name that held weight anymore. You walked east, because west had failed you. 2 miles out, the town became a smudge on the horizon. Even the buzzards turned back. You followed a deer path to a dry creek bed and kept walking. Your boots cracked, your lips bled, your child didn't kick. That night, you lit no fire, just held the last bit of salted bread from your satchel, unwrapped from a piece of muslin embroidered with faded thread. M.C. Ahin 59. You whispered the letters like a hymn, not your initials, but someone else's truth. Morning came like a dare. The sky was wide and too quiet, and your skin stung. The brand had blistered. You dipped a cloth in muddy water and pressed it to your arm, then swore, low and steady, they'll forget what they wrote. You didn't know how yet, but the truth burned cleaner than any ink. By dusk, you reached the edge of a fence line, broken, leaning. Beyond it, a shack, crooked, windowless, but it had a roof and a door. You collapsed beside it, not in fear, not in grief, just exhaustion. Inside, dust swallowed every breath. There was a broken scale on the floor and a flour sack nailed over a crack in the wall. And miraculously, a half-finished quilt slumped over a nail. You pulled it down. It was heavy, stitched with blue thread in swirling lines. You wrapped yourself in it, not for warmth, for memory. You had none of your own left, but someone else's was better than nothing. You slept light, dreamed of names written in smoke disappearing before they reached the sky. You woke cold. The baby kicked once, hard, and you whispered back, "I'm still here." That had to be enough. Somewhere a ledger told a lie, but you were still breathing, still carrying, still dangerous to anyone who thought they'd buried you with a word. If stories like this help you breathe easier, you know where to find more. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the story come to you. The morning sun slid across the floor in crooked patches. You stood slowly, your muscles stiff, skin still hot from the brand beneath your sleeve. The shack had nothing but nails, old grain sacks, and that quilt. Now draped over your shoulders like armor, you stepped outside and nearly walked into him, a man on horseback, tall, dark coat, no badge, a merchant by the look of it, travel-stained, wearing too many pockets, reins loose in one hand, a pistol holstered but untouched. He didn't flinch, didn't leer, just looked at the brand on your arm, then at your belly, then back at your face. "You alone?" he asked, voice dry as gravel. You didn't answer, didn't need to. He could see that you were. He dismounted with a grunt and pulled a canteen from his saddlebag, tossed it. You caught it clumsily and drank, not enough to drown the ache, but enough to believe again. "I trade," he said, tapping a box on the back of his horse. "Cloth, sugar, soap." You reached into your satchel, pulled out the muslin scrap with MC stitched on it, held it up, offered it. He squinted at the fabric, then at you. Something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition? Regret? You couldn't tell. He took the cloth slowly, then looked back at the shack. "You stayin' here?" You shrugged. "Don't got much choice." He was quiet a long time, then said, "There's a widow south of here, 3 miles. Quieter than most. Might give you bread, might not ask questions." Then he swung back into the saddle, didn't say goodbye, didn't wait for thanks, just rode off, like a ghost with a schedule. You watched him go. Dust kicked up behind him, the muslin gone. But not what it carried. That scrap was from something larger, a dress, maybe, or a quilt, a life. You looked at the stitches on the one in your hands, the same blue thread. You turned the hem. There, near the seam, another pair of letters, MC. You weren't the first woman to shelter here. Someone else had been called thief. Someone else had survived long enough to stitch their story into cotton. You looked at your arm, at the blistered mark, then at the fabric. Maybe names could be stolen, but thread didn't lie. You packed slowly, the quilt, a handful of dried berries left in the corner, and the resolve to walk 3 more miles, wherever they led. At dusk you reached the widow's house. A clapboard frame leaning left, chimney cracked but still breathing smoke. A wind chime made from spoons tapped out something like a heartbeat. You knocked, once, then again. No answer. You turned to leave. But the door creaked open behind you, and a woman stood there. Gray hair in a braid, apron streaked with flour, no smile, just a long look. "I don't give out pity," she said. You nodded. "I don't take it." She paused, then stepped aside and said, "One night, you work for the bread." You stepped in, grateful, but not bowed. The warmth inside wasn't just from the fire. It was from the smell of cinnamon, the low hum of something alive in the walls, and the way she laid a second plate without asking your name. You slept by the hearth that night, the brand on your arm throbbing, the quilt folded beside you. And in the quiet you swore, if they burned your name, you'd find the one that couldn't catch flame. The widow's kitchen smelled like burnt molasses and cedar soap. She moved without noise, eyes always ahead, hands never idle. You scrubbed pans with lye that stung your fingers, stacked kindling, repaired a tear in the flour sack with a needle so dull it might as well have been a splinter. No questions, no pity, just work and bread. By the second night, she handed you a piece of smoked ham and pointed to a cedar box on the shelf. "Bring that down." You did. The lid creaked open, and inside, neatly wrapped in oilcloth, was a book, heavy, red leather, sun-bleached, a ledger. Your breath caught. It wasn't the one they'd branded you for, but the ink smelled the same. You flipped it open slowly. Rows of names, dates, transactions. One stood out. MC, 7 bolts muslin, unpaid. Sheriff initials, TB. You pointed. The widow didn't look up. "That ledger came with the house. Wasn't mine then." You traced the line again, those same initials. MC. The name they'd used to frame you had already lived here, long before you arrived. You asked, "Was she your sister?" The widow's hand stilled for the first time. Then she nodded, barely. Melissa. They took her name, branded her for something the foreman did. She never came home. You swallowed hard. So they used her again? Her voice was steady. They never stopped. You set the ledger down, the red leather sticky with age. But the ink was fresh enough to keep bleeding. You looked at the fire, then back at the book. What happens, you asked, when it burns? The widow didn't blink. Then no one can prove a lie was written. That night, you sat by the hearth, turning the ledger's pages. Some names were scratched out, others rewritten in neater script, all by the same hand. TB the sheriff's initials, ink and violence. They left the same scars. Your brand throbbed. You laid the ledger flat, tore out the page with MC, folded it, pressed it into the toe of your boot, then whispered, "They'll learn what it means to lose a name." Before sleep, you checked the quilt. You turned it to the light and followed the blue stitching. There, just below the edge, 3 parallel lines, like a road, like a trail, or maybe a route taken once and meant to be taken again. You traced them with your finger and thought if they tracked you by paper, maybe you'd outrun them with thread. Outside, coyotes howled. Inside, the widow hummed a tune, low, broken. It might have been a hymn, or maybe just the sound of someone who once carried proof and now carried silence. You closed your eyes and let the ledger rest under your boot, like a lie waiting for fire. Morning came with frost lacing the window's edge. You packed before the widow stirred, boots worn, quilt rolled tight, page tucked safe against your skin. You left a single word scrawled in soap on her counter. Thanks. Then you walked east, again. Not because it felt right, but because it didn't belong to them. You followed the fence line until it frayed into brush. Beyond that, a stretch of dry grass cut low by hungry deer. And beyond that, half buried beneath a collapsed shed, your old shack, the same one from your first night. The door was gone. The inside smelled like dust and horses, but it still stood, just barely. You stepped inside and knelt. The floor creaked beneath your weight. Same grain sack nailed to the wall, same cold hearth. But someone had been here since. A knife lay across the sill, thin sharp, still clean, not rusted. Used recently. You held it lightly in your palm, not a weapon, not really, more like a message or a choice. You set it beside the ledger page in your satchel, then unrolled the quilt, spread it across the floor, blue thread side up. There it was again, the 3-line trail. This time, your eye caught something new. A 4th stitch, short and angled, breaking from the rest, like a turn. Or a decision someone once didn't make. You remembered the blue muslin scrap, the ledger line, the brand. Everything pointed in circles, until now. Now you had cloth, and a knife, and a trail. You sat for a long time tracing those stitches, then cut the thread gently with the knife, one length at a time, until it peeled free like a map made of breath. Inside, tucked behind the final fold, was a brass button. No insignia, no polish, just weight. And on the back, MC 1863. Later than the ledger said, she'd lived longer than they claimed, long enough to hide something, long enough to pass it on. You clenched the button tight, wrapped it in muslin, tied it to the inside of your waistband. The quilt you folded once more, tighter, flatter, easier to carry. Then you stepped back outside. The wind had shifted, west again. But this time it didn't feel like retreat. You walked until your legs burned, paused only once to drink from a creek the color of tin. The water stung your cracked lips, but you smiled, there scratched into a stone near the bank. 3 lines again, the same ones, but carved by hand, not thread. Someone left this, someone who bled what you bled, and still moved forward. You followed the lines west, each footstep quieter than the last, until you found it, a shack like your own, but cleaner. Roof intact, no brand, and on the wall, etched in the frame, one sentence burned shallow. This name wasn't stolen. I gave it away. You pressed your hand to the wood, not to pray, to promise, and whispered the name they branded over. Not yours, but hers, Melissa. Then said your own, soft, barely formed, still yours, still waiting, still dangerous. The storm came without warning, thunder low and pulsing like a drum, too far to dance to but close enough to fear. You wrapped the quilt tight and ran. Branches whipped your face, your boots filled with mud, but the satchel stayed clutched to your chest, soaked and heavier with every step. You found shelter beneath a ridge, a shallow overhang where deer tracks pooled in the clay. Lightning split the sky in crooked halves, and for a moment the world turned white. You slid to your knees, your brand burned again like it always did before the rain. Only now the air cooled it. The skin softened, and the fire didn't take. You pulled out the page from the ledger. The ink had begun to smear. Sheriff T.B., the man who signed away your truth. You held it to the firelight, just a flicker, just enough. Watch the letters blur, not vanish, not yet, but blur. And you whispered, they'll see what they did before they forget it. You unrolled the quilt again, laying it over your knees. Rain pelted the fabric. The blue thread swelled, darkened, then lightened again. And right there, on the corner stitch where the brass button once hid, you saw it. A mark, no bigger than a fingernail. A brand, but stitched this time, not burned. MC, her initials, her pain, transformed into something warm. You thought of names, how they carried weight, how they could be stolen or scarred, but also stitched, also sung, also whispered in the dark by someone still trying to be whole. You opened your satchel, pulled the brass button out, set it on the wet earth, and placed the smudged page beside it. Then took the knife, pressed its edge to your forearm, not hard, just enough to remember you still controlled what was written. Then you whispered a name, your name, not out loud, but into the rain. When the wind slowed, you moved again, not to escape, but to return. You walked until the ridge ended and the trail forked. Two paths, one back to town, one toward a place you'd only heard in broken phrases. A burned chapel, a cold well, a name buried beneath both. You took the second because it didn't need to be paved in order to be right. By morning, the brand had faded slightly. The edges no longer raw. The skin no longer screamed. And for the first time, it felt like memory, not punishment. You reached a bluff above the basin. Below, the shape of a chapel collapsed inward, as if praying to no one. And beside it, a grave, wooden cross, weathered, name long gone, but a quilt tucked beneath the stones, just like yours. You laid your own beside it, 2 stories, side by side, proof that pain could be carried and released. You whispered, not just MC. Then, you lit the match slowly, letting the sulfur curl in your nostrils. One flame, small, barely enough to warm your thumb. You held it near the smudged page from the ledger. Sheriff T.B.'s name stared up at you like a dare. Rain had softened it. Your breath softened it further. The flame danced, eager, waiting. But you didn't drop it. Not yet. Instead, you crouched beside the quilt, spread open under the sky. Your hands moved slowly, fingers tracing every worn seam, each square a name, each thread a story, each knot a wound healed the hard way. You reached for the brass button, rubbed it between your fingers until your skin stung. Then you placed it at the center of the quilt and waited. Nothing happened, no light from above, no name whispered on the wind, just the hush of a world that had already forgotten you. But that's when you understood the ledger hadn't mattered. The name T.B. hadn't mattered. Even the brand, red and peeling, had never really mattered, because truth didn't need fire to burn. It only needed witness. And you were still here, still breathing, still watching. You folded the page one last time, tucked it under a stone at the grave, not as surrender, as warning. Then gathered the quilt, now damp but unbowed, and pulled it over your shoulders. It smelled like wet grass, like courage too tired to shout, like the breath of a woman who chose to live her story in second drafts, messy, revised, but hers. You turned west, the bluff behind you, the grave behind you, the lie behind you. 3 days later, you arrived in a town with no sheriff, no ledgers, and no memory of your past. You gave a new name at the bakery, a quiet one that tasted like sugar and ash. They didn't ask questions. You didn't offer lies. You just bought bread and walked out with the paper wrapping still warm against your chest. A girl on the corner played a fiddle with broken strings. You dropped a coin in her jar. She didn't look up, but she played a little louder. You smiled, not because it meant anything, but because it didn't have to. You found a room behind the apothecary. Small, clean, south-facing, a single nail on the wall. You hung the quilt there, carefully, tenderly, like a memory forgiven. That night, you wrote a letter, not to anyone living, just a name. MC folded the page, tucked it behind the button still sewn to your waistband, and whispered, "They branded me a thief, but I kept the thread." Then turned down the lamp and let the darkness hold you, not as a sentence, but as shelter. The bakery smelled like something you hadn't earned yet. Warmth, sugar, permanence. You stepped inside like an apology. The bell above the door jingled once. The woman behind the counter didn't flinch. She had flour on her wrists and a braid like your mother used to wear. She looked at your hands before your face, saw the cracked skin, the pink where the brand was fading, and said only, "You want sourdough or rye?" You blinked, "Whatever's warm." She nodded, wrapped a half loaf in linen, and passed it over without a price. You reached for a coin anyway, but her hand stopped yours. "You've been carrying something too long," she said. "Take it lighter today." Outside, the street was quiet. No dust in the air, no boots behind you, no sheriff in sight. You leaned against the bakery wall and took your first real bite. The crust cut your lip, but the inside melted. It tasted like something that might stay. That night, you asked the apothecary for work. He let you sweep floors and organize jars. He asked your name. You gave him a new one. He never asked twice, but he looked at your hands the way the baker did, like he'd seen someone scrub out ghosts before. A week passed, then 2. Your nights were quiet, your dreams less so. You still folded the quilt each morning, still ran your finger along the threads before sleep, still checked the brass button, making sure it hadn't vanished. You didn't speak the old name, didn't have to. It lived in the stitches now, in the bread you tore, in the silence you no longer feared. One morning, a rider stopped outside, young, nervous, carrying a ledger. He called out names into the wind, names from the old life. You didn't answer, didn't hide, just stood at the door, arms crossed, watching, waiting. He read off the brand number. You stepped forward. He flinched. But you only handed him a jar of calendula balm and said, "For that throat, too many names spoken." He stared at you, then down at the jar, then rode off without saying another word. That night, you stitched a new square onto the quilt. Just one. Simple. Blank. But made with your own hands. No initials. Just breath. Just thread. Just you. It was market day. Children ran barefoot through rows of molasses tins and rabbit pelts. You stood at your booth with jars of liniment, elderberry tonic, and smoked sage bundles wrapped in red thread. Most walked by, some paused, but one man lingered. Older, scarred hand, hat low. He didn't speak at first, just tapped a finger gently along the edge of your quilt, now pinned up behind your wares like a flag no one recognized. Then he said, "This stitch, it's not yours." You looked up, breath caught. He wasn't wrong. The square he pointed at, the trail of 3 lines, that had been Melissa's. You said nothing, but your eyes must have asked, because he answered. "I rode with her once, before the chapel burned." Your heart stumbled. "She left a message." He nodded. Sewn, not spoken. He reached into his satchel, pulled out a worn scrap of muslin, laid it flat on your table, there stitched in faded blue. "Keep walking. Even if they name you." You touched the thread, then reached behind your booth, lifted the quilt, and folded back the edge. He leaned in, nodded, matched. "She carried it west," he said. "Buried it with the woman who tried to unname her." A beat passed, then he added, "But your square, you stitched that on your own." You wrapped the muslin carefully and returned it. He shook his head. "It belongs to you now. You're the one still moving." After he left, you closed the booth early, returned to your room behind the apothecary, hung the muslin beside the brass button on your wall. 2 things passed down, one from fire, one from thread, both silent, both proof. You spent the evening repairing a torn coat, threaded your needle slower than usual, each stitch deliberate, each loop a kind of vow. Later the apothecary knocked. Said a boy had come in limping, looking for his mother. You wrapped your shawl and followed. The boy waited by the well, holding his leg like it might fall off. You knelt, asked his name. He said, "Bo." Then asked yours. You gave him one with no history, one that still fit. He smiled. "Like the woman in the ledger?" You froze. He added, "My grandpa had a ledger. Said there was a woman who burned hers. Said it was brave." You stared, then said, "No, it wasn't brave." You pulled the shawl tighter. "It was necessary." He nodded. Then, with a child's impossible grace, said, "Sometimes fire is what makes something real." You helped him to the porch, tucked a blanket over his lap, then looked west, the direction of every name you'd once carried, and whispered, "You don't have to believe a ledger to live past it." The storm arrived before you finished your tea. Thunder rolled over the valley like a slow drumbeat. The porch roof groaned. You stood watching clouds drag dusk into mid-afternoon. You should have brought in the wash. You should have bolted the shutters. But all you could think about was the muslin square hanging beside your brass button, still damp from the boy's touch, still trembling with a story too old to stay silent. You pull it down gently and fold it into your apron. Step into the rain barefoot. The first drops hit your scalp like pins. But it's the weight of memory, not weather, that makes your shoulders bend. You walk past the well, past the ridge where the preacher once carved warnings in stone, down the slope where the ledger man said he buried his shame. There, beneath a crooked pine, you find the rusted box, the last box. You dig it up with your hands. Open the lid with your teeth. Inside, soaked and mold-touched, the final page of the ledger. And your name, scrawled like a scar, underlined, branded. You tear it out, fold it once, then again, place the muslin square on top, and press them both to your chest. Then you set the box on fire. No ceremony, just flint, breath, and choice. The smoke rises sharp, dark, almost angry, but then something shifts. The flame gutters, glows, and a breeze lifts the ash, carries it west, toward a ridge that once held gallows. Now it holds only wind. You sit by the embers until your dress clings cold to your legs. Then you stand. Stretch your arms out wide. Let the rain hit your palms. Let the smoke mark your breath. Let the name they took burn quiet. You return home through puddles and silence. Wash your hands twice. Hang the apron on a peg and start boiling water for the next coat, for the next wound, for the next girl with no name. The apothecary says nothing, but he nods once and lights a second lamp. Later that night you add a new square to the quilt, one with 2 stitched birds, flying in opposite directions, but from the same branch. You don't label it, you just thread it beside the muslin, and sew it down with stormlight still in your fingertips. The rain stops before morning, but the air still smells of smoke. You smile, because this time it smells like freedom. You ride into town with a basket of medicine and silence. The streets are wet, churned mud from last night's storm. Shutters still closed. No saloon piano, no laughter. Just boots, carts, chores. But they don't see you. They see a shape. A widow. A woman who kept quiet when they wanted her loud, who stayed loud when they wanted her gone. At the dry goods store, you trade bitter root for soap. The clerk doesn't meet your eyes, but he doesn't spit at your feet either. Progress, maybe. You pass the chapel. You remember the sermon on shame, and how every man nodded except one. The boy who used to carry firewood just to see you smile. The boy who saw the ledger once and didn't flinch. He's there again today, now a man. He tips his hat slow and steady, not an apology. A recognition. You nod back. Then keep walking, because you are not here to be forgiven. You are here to choose what gets remembered. Behind the mill house, the children call your name, but not the old one, not the stained one. They call you Miss Finch, like the bird. Like the story May told where the mother bird faked a broken wing to draw danger away from her nest. You taught them that. Now they give the name to you. You whisper it once under your breath, and it fits. Inside the schoolhouse, you deliver 3 poultices and a jar of honey. The teacher nods. She slides the jar toward her stomach. No ring, no husband. You say nothing. Just brush a strand of hair from her face and leave a second jar. Because sometimes mercy is loud, and sometimes it's warm and wordless. By noon, your errands are done, but your task remains. You walk past the jailhouse, up to the records office. Inside, the deputy eyes you like a riddle he's too tired to solve. You hand him a sealed envelope. Inside, the last page of the ledger, burned around the edges, but intact. Your name on it, your real one. He squints, then shrugs. Why now? You say, because ash blows, paper stays. Then walk out. You don't wait for his answer. He's not the one it's for. Back at the apothecary, you unpack the herbs, the root, the seed, the coil of dried honeysuckle, but you keep one packet separate. Mullein leaves, wrapped in linen, stitched with a name, not yours, but someone's who will need it. Soon you leave it on the shelf with no label, just a blue thread tied twice. If she needs it, she'll know. If he needs it, he won't ask, but he'll find it anyway. That night, you stitch again, this time not a bird, but a single flame, and beneath it 2 initials, yours. But backwards, like a secret waiting to be read aloud, you wake to hoofbeats, not thunder, not the slow march of a stagecoach, but a rider's pace, steady, deliberate, alone. The kettle's already boiling. You don't know how you got out of bed so fast, just that something inside you rose before the sun. You wrap your shawl tight. The one May embroidered, the one you almost burned but didn't. You stand at the window, heart quiet but alert. The horse is dark chestnut, dust-coated, rider hunched forward with the weight of travel. And memory. He dismounts without a word, but he doesn't tie the reins, like he's not sure if he's staying, or if he even should. You open the door before he can knock, and say, "I boiled the strong leaves, not the bitter ones." He nods, follows you in. At the table, silence settles between you, but not the silence of strangers, more like the quiet after a long page has turned. You pour the tea. He takes it with both hands, the way he used to hold you, when neither of you had words yet. He sets something on the table, wrapped in canvas, smelling faintly of pine and smoke. You unwrap it slowly. It's the rest of the ledger, what's left of it. Singed, yes, but readable. He says nothing, just lets you read. Your name isn't alone anymore. There's another. A second entry scrawled in a different hand. Yours and his. On the same line, dated months ago, backdated even. A claim no one asked for, but one that might have saved everything. You say, "Why bring this now?" He sips the tea, swallows slow, says, "Because I watched it burn, and I didn't stop it, but I found what floated." You don't cry, you don't reach across the table, but you do lay a hand beside his. Not on, just near, like a bridge not crossed yet, but built. Outside, a wagon clatters past. You both flinch at the memory of ropes, of shouting, of your arms held back, but the sound fades. The moment doesn't. He asks, "Do they still call you by it?" You shake your head. "They stopped the day I stitched something else." He doesn't ask what, but you see the question in his eyes, so you answer anyway. "A flame, and 2 initials." He doesn't smile, but something about his shoulders loosens, as if he'd been carrying a name of his own, one that didn't belong until now. He stands, reaches into his coat, pulls out a small satchel, hands it to you. Inside, mullein, sage, crushed willow bark, and one worn-out ribbon. You know it by feel. The one May used to tie your hair when you were still a girl. He saved it. You don't ask why. You just say, "You're late." He grins finally, says, "I waited for the fire to tell me what survived." You both stand there, the ledger between you, not as proof, but as something that burned and still lived. Like names, like trust, like you. You keep the ledger in the root cellar now, wrapped in canvas, tucked between jars of preserved pears and 2 empty whiskey bottles that once served a darker purpose. You haven't touched it since that day. Not because you're afraid, no, not anymore, but because it's done its job. It burned, and still told the truth. Now it sleeps, like some names should. You're mending one of May's old dresses when you hear a knock, not sharp, not desperate, just one, then quiet. You open the door, already knowing it's Ruth, the widow with the scar across her jaw and the shotgun that speaks first. She hands you a package without meeting your eyes. "You'll want this for what's coming," she says. Then leaves. Inside the brown paper, a dress. Ivory, hand-stitched. You touch the collar and your throat tightens. It's not new. It's not even clean. But it's yours, not the one they auctioned you in, not the one they tore in the alley behind the blacksmith's. This one, this was sewn for no one but you. You wear it under your coat that evening. You don't look in the mirror. Some things are better felt than seen. Outside, the wind smells like hickory and frost. He's by the well, tightening the rope, like he's been waiting for you to step into this exact moment. You say, "I need your help." He nods, like it's the simplest thing, as if he'd been waiting his whole life for you to need him for something small, not for saving, not for fixing, just for showing up. You walk together to town, past the burned-out post office, past the schoolhouse they never finished. Each building carrying a piece of your name, half spoken, half stolen. He stops at the edge of the livery stable, says, "You sure?" You don't answer. You walk in. The man you face used to call you thief. He's the one who made the entry in the ledger, the one that didn't match your handwriting. Now he looks at you and sees what he missed. You're still standing, and the man beside you is not holding a weapon, just silence, and that's louder. You place the ribbon on the counter, the one from May, the one he said was payment once but never returned. Now it's just proof of what wasn't his. He says, "What do you want?" You say, "My name back." He laughs. You don't. He stops. Then, slowly, he opens the drawer. Inside, a stack of documents, receipts, deeds, ledgers. He pulls out the one you came for, the one with the lie. "I burned the rest," he mutters. But you see the edge, charred, not destroyed. Like someone had tried to end it, then changed their mind, or got caught in the middle of deciding. You take it, no shouting, no scene, just paper, just proof. As you leave, he says, "No one cares anymore." You pause at the door, say, "Then why do you?" and walk out before he answers. Back home, you sit with the dress in your lap. You cut a square from the hem, not to discard, but to stitch into the lining of your shawl, a quiet emblem, so you'll carry both fire and thread on your shoulders. He brings you tea. You say nothing. Neither does he. But in the silence, you know, the ashes didn't bury you. They revealed you. The frost has finally taken the apples. You stand barefoot on the back step, watching the skin of the fruit collapse under ice like old secrets giving way. You don't shiver, not anymore. The cold comes with clarity now. Behind you the house is warm, but hollow. You've removed everything that wasn't true. That left only a few books, a cradle, one tin plate, and a set of tin cups with mismatched handles. The rest went to fire or wind or silence. This morning, a rider comes, not fast, not urgent, but familiar. No hat, no rifle, just a folded piece of paper in one hand and your ledger in the other. You recognize him, but he shouldn't be here because last you heard his face wore a scar from the war and his voice trembled like fence wire in a blizzard. But the man who steps down from the horse carries no tremor, no wound, just a question in his eyes. You open the paper. Inside, a copy of your signature. The original, inked by you during harvest long ago, was forged over, then buried in an account that never existed. But this is your hand, unaltered, unowned, and now returned. He says, I found it in a lockbox beneath the bell tower. You don't ask how he got there or why he was looking. You only ask, why bring it here? He looks at the cradle beside your door, says, because it's where the story ends or starts again. That night, you sit beside the fire, holding both the paper and your child. He sleeps with one hand open, the same shape as yours, the same curl at the knuckle, and you wonder, what will he inherit? Your shame, your survival, or your silence? The man, whose name you still don't know, says, people say names are brands. You nod, then say, so is fire. He doesn't reply, but stays. You tell him the story, all of it, not to confess, not for pity, just to let the smoke out. He listens, without interruption, without judgment. When you're done, he says only, he was my brother. And in that instant, everything folds inward. You reach for the ledger, now closed again, and push it toward the fire. He stops you, says, no, not this time. Let it live. You blink. He continues. If you burn it, it becomes legend. If you keep it, it stays truth. So you place it not in flame, but on the highest shelf, above reach, above temptation. A relic, not a wound. He stays 3 nights. On the 4th morning, he stands by the gate, doesn't say goodbye, just waits for you to speak. You walk up beside him, shawl tucked, arms bare in the wind. Say, you still haven't told me your name. He looks down the road, then at you, smiles just barely, and says, you'll write it someday, then leaves. You watch until the dust settles, until even the hoofprints blur back into earth, then return to the cradle. Your son stirs. You whisper to him, no more borrowed names, no more buried ones either. Outside, a new frost creeps across the orchard, but this time it doesn't rot what it touches. It preserves, it sharpens, it waits for spring. The sheriff arrives 2 weeks later. You know it before you see him. The air tightens. Birds vanish. Even the wind turns inward, coiling like it's listening. You're feeding your child when the knock comes. Not angry, just official. You answer with your son in your arms. He tips his hat, doesn't meet your eyes. Widow Langston, he says, like reading a line from a ledger. We need to speak. Outside. You nod. Wrap the baby tight. Step onto the porch. He doesn't accuse. He doesn't need to. The warrant unfolds in his hand like a funeral cloth. Words sharp as nails. Fraud. Forgery. Desertion. You've been summoned to testify against the man who branded you and the brother who returned your name. They expect you to ride alone. You don't. Behind you trails a procession. Widow Corbin, 2 Lakota elders from the mission, the school teacher who saw the ledger first, and the boy who once brought you bread when the town watched you starve. Each one rides without a word. You ride in the front. In Dodge City's courthouse, a room built more for punishment than truth, you sit on a wooden bench that splinters under your weight. The prosecutor reads names, dates, debts. They do not mention your pregnancy. They do not mention the child. They do not mention survival. Only balance sheets and betrayal. When it's your turn to speak, you rise slow, not to prove strength, but because your body is still learning softness. Your voice, when it comes, is not loud, but it carries. You speak not in defense, but in memory. You tell them what the ledger held and what it cost. You describe nights with no fire, birth with no midwife, and one man who brought no salvation, only silence. You speak of your name, The first one, the real one, and the weight it took to reclaim it. Someone coughs, someone leaves, but no one interrupts. You end with this. Truth isn't in the ink, it's in who survives it. Then you sit. Outside, the wind rises again, but this time it moves through the cottonwoods like a hymn. The judge takes 2 hours, returns with a verdict that means nothing. Charges dismissed, record sealed, but no apology. Still, you feel lighter. You ride back the next morning, not alone. The town doesn't speak much, but they nod now, not in reverence, in reckoning. At your door the cradle waits. The fire's still warm. Inside your ledger, untouched on the high shelf, a single page has fallen out. It's blank. Except for one line, written in a stranger's hand, you get to choose what survives. You fold it once, press it to your chest, and finally, let yourself exhale. The snow returns 2 nights later. You wake to it, not in panic, but in peace. The wind is slow now, heavy with memory. Your child sleeps beside you, tiny fists curled into breath-warmed cotton. The fire whispers low, casting long shadows over the hearthstones where the cradle rocks in silence. It is the first snowfall since everything was taken and given back. You move slowly these days, not out of weakness, but choice. The cabin is clean, dignified, no longer a hiding place, but a home. The ledger, the old one, the one that branded you, has been burned. The ash it left behind you, mixed with sage and scattered beneath the cottonwoods. The new ledger sits open on the table. It holds no debts, no accusations, only small things, a name in the margin, a baby's first tooth, a pressed violet from the path to Widow Corbin's. And today, a line you add in ink smudged by your thumb. This family began when everything else ended. Sometimes the boy who once fed you rides by on his father's horse. He waves. Sometimes the Lakota woman comes with more cedar. She never asks what happened. She only looks at your child and leaves with the trace of a smile. Sometimes the night creaks with ghosts. You let them pass through. You don't know if justice was done. But you know this: no one can erase a name once it's spoken aloud, especially not when whispered by a child in sleep, mouth shaped around the sound like prayer. The snow continues to fall, soft, forgiving. You hold your baby, you watch the cradle rock, and when the last log crackles low and the wind hushes one final time, you say it, your name, the one you chose to keep.